For decades, Germany has stood at the center of Europe's economic system. It is the EU's largest economy, a global manufacturing powerhouse, and the engine that produces roughly 1 out of every 10 manufactured goods worldwide. This model once appeared almost indestructible. Today, that certainty is fading. Germany's economy is expected to shrink for the second consecutive year, companies are losing competitiveness, and for the first time in its 87-year history, Volkswagen is openly considering closing factories on German soil. Unemployment has climbed past 3 million people, and the country is staring down the possibility of a third straight year of recession. Instead of accepting decline, Berlin has chosen to make a dramatic move. A €500 billion investment package, the largest spending program in modern German history, equivalent to nearly 15% of the country's entire GDP. For a nation defined by fiscal restraint, this represents a fundamental break with tradition. Germany's economic identity has long been built around discipline. Balanced budgets, low borrowing, and an almost cultural aversion to debt shaped the country's reputation as Europe's anchor of stability. That reputation was not accidental. It was the foundation that allowed Germany to weather crises better than most of its neighbors. Abandoning it now signals how serious the situation has become. This is not routine stimulus spending. It is a gamble that could either reignite Germany's economy or undermine the very credibility that held Europe together for decades. If the plan succeeds, Germany could pull itself out of recession and drag much of Europe with it. If it fails, the consequences would stretch far beyond Berlin. A weakened Germany would mean a weaker European Union, and possibly a renewed debt crisis across the continent. The stakes could not be higher. At first glance, Germany does not look fragile. It has a highly educated workforce, a strong middle class, and some of the highest industrial wages in the world. But its economy is structured very differently from most advanced nations. As countries grow richer, they usually shift away from manufacturing towards services like finance, technology, or consulting. Germany never fully made that transition. Instead, it doubled down on producing physical goods and selling them abroad. Manufacturing still forms the backbone of the German economy. Entire cities revolve around industrial output. Wolfsburg, for example, is home to the largest car factory on Earth. More than 60,000 people work there, producing close to 1 million vehicles every year. That single plant manufactures more cars annually than the entire United Kingdom or Italy combined. Germany alone accounts for over a quarter of all manufacturing output in Europe. Exports are the lifeblood of this system. Nearly half of Germany's GDP comes from selling goods to other countries. That share is roughly 3 times higher than in the United States and far above levels seen in France or the UK. For years, this model generated enormous trade surpluses, often exceeding $200 billion annually. That surplus money flowed back into German companies and government coffers, providing ample tax revenue without the need for heavy borrowing. This structure allowed Germany to grow while keeping public debt low. But it also created a dangerous vulnerability. The entire system depended on continued foreign demand. If global buyers stopped purchasing German products, the model would unravel quickly. Rather than diversifying away from this risk, Berlin chose to reinforce it. In 2009, Germany passed the so-called debt brake, a constitutional amendment that sharply limited government borrowing. Under this rule, federal deficits were capped at a tiny fraction of GDP, far lower than what most developed economies allow. For comparison, the United States routinely runs annual deficits above 5% of GDP, more than 10 times Germany's self-imposed limit. The goal was to signal absolute fiscal responsibility, reassure investors, and keep borrowing costs permanently low. For nearly a decade, the strategy appeared flawless. Between 2010 and 2019, Germany's GDP grew by almost 25%, outpacing much of Europe. Unemployment dropped below 5%. Trade surpluses piled up year after year. German bonds became some of the safest assets in the world. Reliability became the country's brand, reinforced by everything from its export strength to its engineering reputation. But this apparent stability masked deep structural risks. When external shocks finally arrived, Germany discovered that discipline alone could not protect it. Beginning in 2020, a chain of crises exposed just how dependent the country had become on factors beyond its control. The first blow came with the global pandemic. As lockdowns spread and trade slowed, Germany's export-driven economy stalled almost immediately. Within months, exports dropped by roughly 10%, wiping out over €100 billion in trade revenue. The automotive sector was hit especially hard, with production falling nearly 25% in a single year. By the end of 2020, Germany's economy had contracted by almost 5%, its worst performance since World War II. Just as recovery seemed possible, a second shock followed. Russia's invasion of Ukraine did not merely disrupt trade. It attacked the foundation of Germany's industrial energy supply. Before the war, more than half of Germany's natural gas came from Russia, fueling steel plants, chemical facilities, and car factories across the country. Within weeks, those imports collapsed by around 90%. Energy prices surged. Electricity costs jumped by more than a third in a matter of months. Factories began shutting down, not because orders disappeared, but because operating costs became unbearable. By late 2024, Germany's GDP had fallen by over $200 billion. The export machine that once defined the country had stalled, and the rules that once guaranteed stability now left the government with few tools to respond. Unlike many other developed nations, Germany could not respond to this crisis the way others did. When recessions hit wealthy countries, governments typically step in with aggressive spending programs to stabilize demand. During the pandemic, the United States alone injected more than $5 trillion into its economy through stimulus checks, infrastructure projects, and emergency funding. The logic is straightforward. Government spending puts money into people's hands, businesses survive, workers keep their jobs, and economic activity resumes. Germany, however, was constrained by its own rules. The debt brake limited borrowing precisely at the moment when borrowing was most needed. Even as unemployment climbed above 3 million people for the first time in decades, Berlin's hands were largely tied. Unlike its neighbors, Germany could not unleash a massive stimulus without violating its constitution. As the recession dragged on, external pressures mounted. The United States threatened tariffs of up to 15% on German exports, a devastating prospect given that the US is Germany's third-largest trading partner. Economic models suggested that such tariffs alone could shave an additional €20 billion off Germany's economy. At the same time, Washington pushed Berlin to dramatically increase its defense spending, warning that NATO commitments could be reconsidered unless Germany met ambitious military funding targets. These demands came at the worst possible moment. With energy costs elevated, exports weakening, and borrowing limits in place, the government faced an impossible equation. Something had to give. In March 2025, Germany made a decision that would have been unthinkable just a few years earlier. The debt brake was effectively dismantled, and a €500 billion spending package was announced. This was not a marginal adjustment or a temporary relief measure. It was the largest investment program in German history, designed to fundamentally reshape the economy. The money was allocated across infrastructure, green energy, industrial support, and regional budgets. For a country that had built its identity on fiscal restraint, the shift was seismic. On paper, the logic behind the plan is compelling. Economic forecasts suggest that an injection of this scale could push growth back into positive territory within 2 years. It could create over 1 million jobs, stabilize tax revenues, and restore confidence among businesses and consumers. Germany also enters this gamble with relatively low public debt compared to other advanced economies, giving it more room to maneuver. But Germany's role in Europe makes this risk uniquely dangerous. The country is not just managing its own economy. It functions as the financial backbone of the European Union. When countries like Italy, Spain, or Greece face debt crises, investors continue lending largely because they assume Germany will step in if necessary. Berlin acts as Europe's lender of last resort, quietly stabilizing the system when others falter. This arrangement only works if Germany itself is unquestionably stable. A massive increase in German borrowing threatens to undermine that assumption. Early warning signs have already appeared. Foreign investors have begun trimming their exposure to German bonds, and credit agencies have raised concerns about potential downgrades. If confidence in German debt weakens, borrowing costs across Europe could rise, reigniting old crises that were never fully resolved. Despite these risks, Berlin appears to have concluded that inaction would be even worse. Projections showed that without intervention, unemployment could rise above 5 million by 2026, while GDP remained stuck in negative growth. At that point, Germany's ability to support the rest of Europe would collapse anyway. From this perspective, the gamble was not optional. It was a last resort. The investment package itself is divided into two main pillars. The first, and largest, is infrastructure spending, totaling roughly 300 billion euros. This includes major expansions of high-speed rail networks connecting Germany's largest cities. Faster and more reliable transportation is intended to do more than reduce commute times. It is meant to integrate supply chains, allowing manufacturers to coordinate production more efficiently across regions. Despite its reputation, Germany has underinvested in infrastructure for years. Over a third of its major bridges are now classified as needing urgent repair, one of the worst rates in Europe. Broadband access remains far below the EU average, limiting productivity in both industry and services. These deficiencies accumulated quietly during years of fiscal restraint, and they now represent a major drag on economic performance. The second pillar of the plan allocates roughly 100 billion euros to the Climate and Transformation Fund. This money targets renewable energy projects, including massive offshore wind farms in the North Sea and the dramatic expansion of solar capacity. The goal is to reduce dependence on imported energy, stabilize electricity prices, and restore competitiveness to Germany's energy-intensive industries. If successful, these projects could address one of the core weaknesses exposed by the Ukraine war. Energy prices in Germany remain significantly higher than before the conflict, putting domestic manufacturers at a disadvantage compared to global competitors. Producing more power at home could ease this burden and support long-term growth. Historical examples suggest such strategies can work. After World War II, Japan poured enormous resources into rebuilding infrastructure and industry, achieving decades of rapid growth. But Germany's situation is very different. Japan was rebuilding from devastation, where each new road or factory delivered dramatic productivity gains. Germany is a mature economy, where improvements are incremental and returns take time. This timing problem may be the greatest risk of all. According to Germany's own central bank, many of these projects will not meaningfully boost growth until at least 2027. In the meantime, the government must service the debt used to fund them. Interest payments are already expected to exceed 40 billion euros annually, nearly as much as Germany spends on education. If interest rates rise further, those costs could escalate quickly. German bond yields have already climbed to their highest levels in 4 decades, hovering around 3%. A further increase of just 2 percentage points would add tens of billions in annual costs, potentially overwhelming the benefits of the investment itself. In that scenario, the gamble could unravel before results materialize. At its core, this gamble is not just about stimulus spending. It represents a complete reversal of Germany's long-standing economic philosophy. For decades, the model was simple: keep government debt low, rely on exports to fuel growth, and allow the private sector to do most of the heavy lifting. This approach transformed Germany into Europe's most reliable economy and one of the wealthiest nations on earth. But it also left the country dangerously exposed to shocks beyond its control. The pandemic revealed how fragile global supply chains had become. The war in Ukraine exposed the risks of energy dependence. And rising geopolitical tensions highlighted how vulnerable export-driven economies are when international demand weakens. Germany's old model worked brilliantly in a stable world. In today's fragmented and volatile environment, it has become a liability. Now Berlin is attempting something radically different. Instead of acting as Europe's fiscal disciplinarian, Germany is repositioning itself as a driver of state-led investment. Public spending, rather than private exports, is being tasked with restarting growth. This is not a temporary adjustment. It is a structural shift in how the economy is expected to function going forward. The success of this strategy hinges on execution and timing. If infrastructure projects are completed efficiently, if renewable energy capacity comes online quickly, and if productivity rises before debt costs spiral out of control, Germany could stabilize its economy and restore confidence. In that scenario, higher growth would generate the tax revenues needed to manage the additional debt, validating the gamble. But failure carries enormous consequences. Delays, cost overruns, or weak productivity gains would leave Germany saddled with debt without the growth needed to support it. In that case, borrowing costs could rise further, forcing spending cuts or tax increases that would deepen the recession rather than end it. What makes this moment especially critical is Germany's role within Europe. The entire European financial system rests on the assumption that Germany is unshakable. If investors begin to doubt Berlin's stability, the effects will ripple outward. Weaker economies could face higher borrowing costs, old debt crises could resurface, and the cohesion of the European Union itself could come under strain. In many ways, Germany's decision reflects a broader question facing advanced economies worldwide. Can massive state intervention still revive growth in mature, highly developed nations? Or has the era of government-led economic miracles passed? Japan's experience, America's stimulus programs, and now Germany's gamble are all part of the same global experiment. There is no clear answer yet. The benefits of infrastructure and energy investment take years to materialize, while financial markets react in real time. Governments must act long before results are visible, betting that patience and confidence will hold. If either breaks, the costs can be severe. For Germany, standing still was no longer an option. Prolonged recession, rising unemployment, and declining competitiveness threatened to erode not only its economy, but its political and social stability as well. In that context, the €500 billion package is less a bold ambition than a calculated risk taken under pressure. What happens next will shape Germany's future for decades. If the gamble succeeds, it could redefine the country's economic model and reinvigorate Europe as a whole. If it fails, it may mark the end of Germany's role as the continent's economic anchor. Either way, this moment will be remembered as a turning point. Germany is no longer betting on restraint. It is betting on transformation.